In this video tutorial, we're going to discuss some new features found within the property grid of Adapt Builder 2020. Now, in previous versions of the software, the user was pretty much always required to modify components through single component property windows or dialogues, or through modify selection. So if we double click on a column, for example, we would go into the properties of that column, modify the column, select the green checkbox, and that would modify or change the selections made for that particular column. If I had a group of columns, for example, if I selected this group of columns here, and I went to modify selection, that would modify the properties associated with a group of the column. So there were two main options in changing properties of components within a structure. That could be columns, walls, slabs, openings, support lines, tendons, whatever you've modeled in the program. You could make those changes through single entry or through modify selection. The property grid is a new feature we've introduced in Adapt Builder 2020, and if we go to visibility, this will open the property grid. It should open by default. You can close it. If you do close it, you can select here to open property grid. You can also select the option to colorize. Now, colorize will be handled in a separate video, but this is also a new feature that's really powerful in being able to filter and kind of sort components in a pretty large model, or any model rather, for efficient use of the software and making modifications and understanding what's been modeled. So in this case, we're going to mainly focus on the property grid. Now, if we switch over to property, one other thing you can do is you can create a floatable window. So this can be undocked. You can move the window at any location. If you want to dock that again, you can right click, select dock, and that goes back into position. You can also pin it. So if I unpin, then these are just floating tabs. If I select the floating tab, that window will appear out, and we can go back and lock it in place by selecting that tab. Let's go back and show this entire model. Now, if nothing is selected in the model, the property grid will appear blank. If I select, for example, a slab or any component, the property grid will show the properties of that component, anything associated with that slab. Here we show that one slab out of 33 has been selected. It's slab region 4. If I use the buttons above, for example, I can collapse or expand all. Identification, this shows us the label of the component, the group of the component. So there's all of the information related to that component that can be modified within the grid. If there's a plus symbol next to a option, for example, group, material, usage case, we can select that plus, and that will open that dialog. So here we could create a new group and associate this slab to a new group. If we wanted to modify the material and add a new material, we could do that directly from here rather than having to go to criteria and concrete material. It's directly built within the property grid. Also, usage cases. We could define additional usage cases directly here instead of having to select a component, double-clicking on the component, modifiers, edit usage to get to this window. So it saves a few clicks for the user. Now, one really nice thing within the property grid as compared to previous methods for making modifications to any component is if I wanted to change the thickness here to, let's say, 12 inches, you'll notice that there's no check mark at the top. Historically, Adapt dialogues have had check marks to accept a change and actually propagate the change into the model. Here, once you enter it and you move out of that cell, the value changes, and there's no need to check another box or click another click in order to accept that. If we select multiple objects, if we go back and let's say we select these slabs here, the program will now show we have 4 of 33 slabs selected. We can actually go and look at a particular slab region. For example, this lists the regions that are selected. These are not actually selectable. If I select 3, it's not going to only select 3. However, if I select a group of components, here I'm going to just window through slabs, walls, columns, etc. Now I can right click and I can isolate that selection. So here I've actually isolated those walls that were selected. If I do the same thing. Let's do a vertical window here. I have slabs, columns, and this lower level foundation slab selected. So again, if I only wanted to select the columns or isolate the columns, I could right click. I could select all type, deselect this. So here I've deselected the columns. Coming back to that, I'll go back and window that. Or isolate. So here I've isolated those slabs. So there are ways to filter within a window selection or a group selection of components within the property grid. This makes selecting objects much easier within the program. When you do have a group of selected objects, you'll notice that we have dots shown under, for example, label. That means that we have different labels for the selected components. We can't really Now, when we do have a group of selected components or like components, we can modify them as a group very quickly within the grid. Let's take an example here. If I select through all of this, let's say I wanted to change some of these beams at level 6. We're going to go back and just look at that level. We have a kind of a series of beams there at this level. Those beams are highlighted in red, or they're colored in red. And so I want to modify those beams to a specific size, for example. And if I just window through this, it's hard to select, those beams unless I switch to single level mode, select by type beam. And that's still an option. We could still do that. However, if I select through this nest of different components, the first thing I'll do is just filter. I'll say isolate those columns. I'm going to isolate the beams. When I isolate, you can see because I have multiple beams selected. For label, for example, if I wanted to label all those beams the same label, I'm going to call L6 beams. I could modify anything that is a like property. So any group selection that shows the 3 dots can be modified for a property, or for example a geometric property, thickness, depth, etc. So these particular columns, for example, those can be modified here by width or by depth based on what the user wants to input. So if I say, well, I want all of the beams to actually be 32 inches wide, keep the depth that's already there but make the width 32 inches, that propagates a change to all the beams. I could do the same for depth or just leave those alone. So modifications to groups of components can be done very quickly and very easily within the property grid. Any modification made in the property grid is similar to making the modification through modify selection or through the individual components property window. This just gives the user a much easier way to manage the information presented in front of them for whatever has been selected. If you have any questions about this tool or about the release of Adapt Builder 2020, please contact adaptsupport@risa.com. Thank you.